All right, welcome into Surviving Paradise. Another week with this little podcast that we take a sometimes serious, sometimes funny look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they're living in a modern day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman. And if you're new here, former elder, ministerial servant, and most importantly, a kid raised in Jehovah's Witnesses primarily in the 70s and 1980s. So again, if you're new, always a top of the show disclaimer. We try to have a little fun. We try to heal. There's lots of sarcasm, lots of humor in my own brand of laughs, which you might expect from, I guess, any podcast host, but never meant to offend. So if you're easily offended or triggered, just know that I try to send out a warning. And I think this week, I want to send out that warning early. I'm going to tackle a subject that is really, really serious to me. It's near and dear to my heart. It's something that's upset me since the word go. When I was a young kid, probably mostly as I grew older and started to understand things better in the late 70s, but certainly as I became an adult, a parent, and an elder, I had an opportunity to look back with hindsight. And it's a subject that really, really upsets me and I think is undercovered. I don't think that people are taking a look at this nearly as closely as they should be, maybe for good reason, because there's actual repulsive physical criminal acts that are taking the headlines. And what is that subject? It's my belief that children, kids, the innocent, are under full-blown attack in Jehovah's Witnesses. At their most vulnerable, at their most innocent, the governing body has been after the minds of children for decades, almost from the very beginning of this organization. And I use that term loosely. And it's not hard to see why. It's low-hanging fruit. It's the most vulnerable, the most precious, the most innocent among us. In the minds of the governing body, their entire plan is to get them before they're able to tie their shoes. And I say that half sarcastically and even more so seriously because it is true. Most current growth in Jehovah's Witnesses in this cult, and I will call it a cult throughout, comes from those that are born in, from children, typically of parents, grandparents, or other caretakers that have the responsibility of educating and protecting the smallest among us. That is where, if you can even use the term, growth is coming from among Jehovah's Witnesses. And even that, I believe, is incredibly dishonest in their reporting. As we talked a little bit about in last week's episode, witnesses now are encouraging children to get baptized as young as 6 years old. That is in print. See last week's episode. Get them baptized, push them out there, and get them preaching. Get them telling people the end is near. We're in the last days, that if you don't listen to us, you are going to die. And make no mistake, while a parent may not prepare their child that way for Saturday field service, because most of the parents don't prepare, if we're being honest, that is the message. That's the message. It can't be denied. That is the message. Believe as we do, follow what we do, obey what we do, or die in the near future. So I want to unpack what I think is a horrific subject. I often find it very difficult to have any fun or make anything light of this, even in a sarcastic way, because to me, it's one of the reasons I started hitting record on this podcast after being out of the religion for almost 13 years now, 14 years, that being children, the most innocent, the most unprotected, the most vulnerable among us. And my God, does the governing body go after them. Now, I want to say a quick disclaimer about this episode here. because if you're tuning in, you probably think you know exactly where this is going. And maybe you do. But I have two disclaimers actually. One, I'm not going to spend much time, if any, getting into the most disgusting, evil, and horrific situation going on with child abuse in Jehovah's Witnesses today. I dealt with it as an elder. I saw it firsthand. I've seen the lifelong damage, the pain. I've had those in my family, those that I love immensely, become victims of child abuse, of child sexual assault among Jehovah's Witnesses, to what the governing body currently protects in a secret database. And make no mistake, if you're a witness here and this is uncomfortable, I myself have been back at that time to Brooklyn, Bethel, 2 to 3 times in person. While no one gets access to it, I can assure you there is a database that exists of child abusers. There are far more incredible activists that cover this despicable situation, this crime that's happening daily. And I encourage you to take a look at their hard work. Most are doing it absolutely out of the goodness of their heart. They're actively involved in exposing this evil. But I'm not going to go deep on that today. I feel like that needs 2 to 3 of its own episodes. And to be very candid, based on time and more importantly, my own makeup, I don't have the emotions for it right now. It infuriates me, and then it just crushes my soul to think kids are undergoing this in a place where they should feel safe, where they're told it's safe and loving. We all got a dose of this at the Australian Royal Commission several years ago. If you're a Jehovah's Witness listening and you haven't watched, you should. You should. It's a secular event. There's no apostasy involved, if that's what makes you nervous. It's an Australian Royal Commission, a court environment. And if you watch that trial in detail and you come away shrugging like nothing's going on or you don't care, you're part of the problem. Just like I was part of the problem before I left the organization. I literally was an elder teaching the other elders how to deal with this crime at Kingdom Ministry School in the mid-2000s. I was assigned by Brooklyn Bethel, given an outline. I'm not prepared to talk about this subject as much here today. It's very emotional for me, and I'm not ready to do that. But just note, that's what's grabbing the headlines, as it should. But we're not going to unpack that one today. Just know that it's in the background to some degree. That's not even the right way to say it. My second disclaimer here is I'm not going to do or spend any time discussing here how Jehovah's Witness parents are literally leaving their children to die if they're in need of a blood transfusion. It's so incredibly evil. There's so many dynamics and moving parts to that discussion that it deserves its own episode, its own show. So there you go. 2 disclaimers on rock solid, factual, criminal, hideous events that are happening among Jehovah's Witnesses today that primarily are happening to children, little babies. So those will deserve their own spotlight when I can work myself up to that, because those are just going to be emotional conversations for me, frankly. So where do we go from here? I want to talk about the ongoing assault on a child's mind and the effects it has on a person for the rest of their lives, including this podcast host. Make no mistake, we see things differently. We've been harmed. Our brains have been controlled for a time period. And for those that may still be in, they're still under control. I don't believe as a human being that there's anything more innocent, more pure, more lovable, more instantaneous smiles and laughs, maybe you well up, tears in your eyes, than a child, a little person, a munchkin. It's such a special time. in our experience in this life. Scientists have proven over the past 50 years, especially over the last 50 years, that those first 5 years of a child's life, and from baby to school age, are critical for a successful and happy life. Science has exposed that it has a dramatic impact on the brain of a child, their emotions, their self-image, their self-esteem, and that being what they are exposed to, what they are taught, what they are told. Science has proven that what you say to your child as early as the womb, I mean, if you've had children out there, and again, everybody knows my affinity for mothers. I think it's the most special role on the earth to create life. And you've seen the moments where a father or a partner or someone is speaking to the womb and how the baby will move. It starts, truly can potentially start that early in life, in the womb. And what a child is exposed to impacts their personality, the way they think, how they view the world. There is truly not a more innocent and purer thing than a new little person, a little munchkin. And so with that said, I want to talk about what I feel is something that is a bit understated. And maybe that's my take. I don't know if I want to be right or wrong. It makes me sick. But I don't feel we talk enough about the assault on a child's mind among Jehovah's Witnesses at a time when they simply don't even know what they're doing. A report from Cohen and Walthall, 2003, Osofsky in 1995 by Expansion, had this to say about kids, about the little people. Young children under chronic stress often fail to develop those secure relationships with their caregivers and then do not have a basic sense of trust or security in the world. End quote. Let me assure you that a young child of Jehovah's Witnesses are under chronic stress at all stages of their childhood. And I'm about to launch into X amount of minutes showing and sharing some examples and also sharing some of my own experience as a kid and now as an adult, the baggage, the end result, the stuff I have to unpack even now in my mid-50s, that all started as a little guy in Jehovah's Witnesses. Now listen, life has challenges. It's not all about Jehovah's Witnesses, I should say, are not all to blame for every challenge or emotional upheaval or scar that a human being faces. Come on, that wouldn't be accurate. There's other things in life, environment, our parents' marriage, how we eat. There's a million things. But make no mistake, if you're a little person with a brain that's still forming in its first 5 years and you're exposed to what I'm about to share with you, it has an impact. And it is not in the least bit positive. And so I personally consider it an assault on a child's mind. And it's for that reason that what children are exposed to in Jehovah's Witnesses infuriates me. And to be honest, while I would never try to talk someone into seeing things my way, I simply share my opinion and my observation and my experience. It really should infuriate a whole lot more people, most especially lawmakers, government, people that could put a stop to this. And friends, it's nothing new. It's not like this is a recent dynamic among Jehovah's Witnesses and children. This has been going on for decades. Decades after decade after decade. You could arguably say this has been going on for over a century. Children exposed to an assault on their thinking, their minds, everything that shapes them as a human being. Let me give you an example. Just going back, a few decades, the 1940s, and a guy that's really just a swell fella. I showed my age there with those stupid words. But I don't know if there's so many bad guys in the history of this organization but this guy might take the cake. I'm willing to argue this. Good old Judge Joseph Rutherford. In the Watchtower, September 15th, 1941, just as an example, on page 287, the judge wrote and released a book called Children. For the very, very old timers, they'll recognize that. For those of us that have seen old copies, you might recognize it. The newer generation that are possibly listening to this podcast have no idea what that is. It was one of the rainbow books, came in all the pretty bright colors of its time. The judge had this to say on page 287, Watchtower, September 15th, 1941, about his book, Children. He says, quote, "It is your privilege between now and before the day school opens to spend 6 hours a day taking the book Children to others. The parents should encourage their children to do this very thing if they would have them live." End quote. All I could do is laugh. It's so mind-blowing. This is the assault on a child's mind among Jehovah's Witnesses. And you might say, come on, man, that's old light. It's from the 40s. Listen, we're going to talk about plenty of modern stuff leading up to today. But this gives you a good snapshot of generations of people that are now adults or very, very elderly, obviously in the 40s. But they were told, take my book Children out there, you kids, for 6 hours if you don't want to die. Kids were exposed to this. They've been exposed to it from the very beginning of this organization. So in my mind, the assault on the minds of children is far more subtle than some of the hideous crimes that we talked about at the outset. And it's incredibly difficult, especially to kids that are born into this religion. Your precious little brain doesn't know anything else. We come into this world a blank slate. We put our full trust in the hands of our parents. A child simply doesn't know better. They have nothing to judge a statement or a command or a teaching by. A baby or a child is completely dependent on what they are exposed to or told by those whom they trust. And let me tell you, the reason this is so evil and so damaging is it colors everything for the rest of a person's life. For those listening, I never want to draw out emotion or make someone feel sad, but probably most people that stumble on this podcast are people that have left this horrific religion, or they may have family that are still a part of it, and it stirs emotions. I don't need to tell you or anyone else that how we view ourselves if we were born into this thing as a kid has been shaped by this garbage. How you view your desires, your body, your feelings, the way you think. The constant assault on a child's mind if born into this religion is a crime, and it's flying under the radar. You could arguably say this is true of all religions, Stacy. Come on, man. But this is the one I'm going to pick because this is the one I was exposed to. And that crime comes at a child in the form of publications, talks, meetings, assemblies. In recent times, it's videos and cartoons. And the result is that Jehovah's Witness kids often grow up to be adults with a plethora of issues, dysfunction, a lack of understanding about themselves, about their personal thoughts and feelings. I talk to adults, many of my friends who grew up in my generation, and I can absolutely confirm this is true of me as well. We grow up oftentimes struggling under a daily malaise. How you define that is up to you. Sometimes it's a low-grade depression. If you're familiar with the concept of disassociation, Jehovah's Witness kids grow up to be adults that deal with these things. And then once we're adults and we know that we've been duped as a kid, if we're fortunate enough to find our way to the door, we have to grapple with things like mortality, something we never thought was an issue because we were taught we were never going to die. We were going to live forever in a paradise with our own pair of khakis, a fruit basket, and a panda bear. We didn't have to worry about anything else. That teaching is pounded into the young mind, and therefore everything you do outside of that is colored by that. Do I really need to try in school? What does it matter? Do I really need a good job? Does it really matter who I marry? Paradise will fix everything. We have to grapple with issues that we never thought we'd face, and not the least of which is getting old. As I mentioned, mortality. Something we were taught in the 70s and 80s wasn't going to be possible, wasn't going to happen. We weren't getting old. The famous quote from the late 60s Awake that, there's only a few months left of this. You don't even need to worry about school, jobs, or anything else. Here we are in 2022 in our 50s, and we have to face those things. Can anyone listening not see that as criminal? Remember, we didn't always have gray hair and crow's feet. We were little munchkins, little kids. Now, for those who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, you may think, come on, man, this guy's dramatic. Or think, so what, man? Everybody deals with those kinds of problems. But simply stated, many of us didn't. We thought this was all normal until we left. That's when reality hits us, often at an older age. Our baby brains were pounded with a much different message than most kids on earth. Most of us land in emotional quicksand that we can't seem to get out of some days. And in most cases, it takes consistent years of therapy to simply rebuild the way we think or the way we feel. And I know I'm not alone in this. I have many friends that I talk to all the time. And I know there's many listeners who I haven't met personally that can relate to what I mean. That low-grade fog that we live in because of what our minds were exposed to by Jehovah's Witnesses as a kid. Now, I guess this goes without saying for any cult. But for me personally, this is the one I was born into. So aside for the challenges that every child faces as they grow up in today's world, take time to consider what a Jehovah's Witness child is exposed to every single week at the Kingdom Hall and beyond. Don't fool yourselves. The 8 guys in upstate New York, the governing body, knows what they're doing with the meeting schedule, the publications, the messaging. They're giving baby brains, precious, innocent children, they're giving them thoughts and feelings that will follow them through life. So if you think this is all dramatic, if you think this is a silly subject, I can't imagine this is true, but there might be 1 or 2 people out there. Just keep in mind that this isn't about staring at an adult today because, let's face it, we're adults. It's too late. It's too late. That's the candid, blunt commentary on this. But as you walk through this subject and you are an adult, picture your inner child. In my day, exposed to the things I'm going to share briefly in this podcast 5 days a week at the time I was a kid as a JW. Between the Sunday meeting, which was Public Talk and Watchtower, to the Tuesday night book study, then the Saturday morning book study. Then there was Thursday night meetings with the now defunct theocratic school, and then followed by the service meeting. And then Saturdays were field service. If you were lucky, you got to look forward to a quote unquote coffee break that included a donut with sprinkles on it if you were lucky, after being dragged to strangers' doors as a kid on a sunny day. Don't fool yourself and don't dismiss this, because the point of this isn't necessarily to cry me a river about those of us that are adults and we've aged and hopefully we're getting help and therapy. Trust me on that. I know I have. But it's to protect kids today. It's to protect the little people today. How do we do it? What can we do? I don't know that I have the answers. All we can do is create awareness for it. So here I am, just a schmo, creating some awareness. It guts me what kids are facing today. It guts me to think about the things I personally missed out on. So sure, it's projection in some ways. But don't dismiss this. It's a horrific crime against future generations, against the precious among us. So let's take a look at this assault on a child's mind after that very lengthy emotional preamble. And let's start at the top. Let's start with Jehovah's Witness leadership. Remember, they're often called Christ's brothers. That's right. The 8 guys in upstate New York that we are expected and demanded to believe were handpicked by Jesus to lead all of mankind across this great rock into a new world. How does the governing body feel about children? What is the messaging to children from Christ's brothers, considering they want us to believe Jesus influences their decisions, their comments, and what they feed us? Look no further than just a few weeks ago, folks. Just a few weeks ago. At the 2022 District Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses, of which most people saw all on video, the gloriously interesting guy, Stephen Lett, who is just flat bizarre, and that's probably the nicest thing I can say. He goes on camera to refer to children as enemies of God. Children. The same children the Bible tells you Jesus called to him, that he cared about, that he gave his life for, if you're a Christian and a Bible reader. Stephen Lett, one of Christ's brothers, gets up there on a podium with millions watching and says children are enemies of God. Now, if you want to say, what a dumbass, I'm right there with you. But consider this. You and I as adults can say that. We can think that. We can laugh. We can make fun of him. We can get angry. But in the millions of people hearing that children are enemies of God, were children. Baby brains, little people, munchkins, watching Christ's brother look into a video or a camera, and say children are enemies of Jehovah. And listen, he didn't misspeak. He kept talking about it. And why is anyone shocked? Because it's nothing new. The governing body has been giving this messaging to all of Jehovah's Witnesses, including kids in the audience, for decades. I present to you the Awake of 1982, page 17, where we get these loving reminders from the governing body. Quote, first, let's dispose of a common fallacy that a baby is just a little moldable hunk of clay devoid of individuality, an object, a plaything. Rather, he is a living, breathing human with real needs. An infant is generally alert, responsive, and has a unique personality, albeit flawed. I have never looked at a little chubby-cheeked baby and thought, they're so flawed. In print. Back to the quote, this helps us appreciate that while cute and cuddly, infants are capable of deceit, anger, and jealousy, the trademarks of imperfect humanity. End quote. The Awake of 1982, page 17, from Christ's Brothers. As you hold a baby in your arms, and I love them, I just am intrigued by babies, even as an old guy, they just look back at you like, what is all this, man? And we are apparently supposed to look back at them as flawed and capable of deceit, anger, and jealousy. This is courtesy of the 8 guys in upstate New York. This is the messaging a young child gets at a Kingdom Hall. They get not only at a Kingdom Hall, but possibly from their parents who are obeying these 8 guys, who are obeying who they think is Jehovah and his son. It's a crime. It's an absolute assault on the mind of a child. And it doesn't stop there. I'm not going to go throughout all of history and pick out all kinds of quotes, but I will say this. Toni Morris, another mind-blowing personality, to think that Jesus looked all over the earth and went, that guy over there who talks about people being split in half like hot dogs at Armageddon and blowing out burning matches saying people will disappear and then giggles. That guy is a guy I want, according to what we are supposed to believe. And in recent meetings, Tony, also videos, because he's the guy behind Caleb and Sophia, we're getting there, has stated openly that kids not getting baptized and being active preachers means they're lined up to die. It's on video. It doesn't matter truly to me, and I guess I'm getting a little fired up, if you're a witness who's listening and going, that's a lie. It's on video. You can go watch it right on your own website. From an annual meeting to district conventions, it's all right there. And in that audience are children, kids. It starts at such a young age in that organization. They are flooded with propaganda by publications and at meetings. In my day, my life rotated around this cult. It was 3 trips to the Kingdom Hall a week for meetings, and then it was Saturday service, as I mentioned. And all the adult messaging in that Kingdom Hall was heard by all the children present. If you're new to this, Jehovah's Witnesses don't separate children from their parents. Everybody is instructed to be sitting in their seat, and everybody gets the same spiritual food in this ongoing spiritual paradise. So those kids sit there and hear it all. The governing body and Jehovah's Witnesses aren't interested in shielding children from fear or violence. Oh, they're going to tell you they are. They'll claim they want to protect children, and every now and then they'll pop out a watchtower on it. Then they will create and demand that a young child, and I mean young, sub 5 years old, look at endless images of death, violence, fear, and destruction. Don't fool yourself. Billions of pages of this proof. Now, in my day, we had my book of Bible stories. It was thrown into my lap at a young age. But even before that, as a little guy, I have to share, early 70s, I went to meeting with my own little book bag. Don't remember how I got one. And the only book in there, didn't even have a Bible. I remember the only book I had in there was the Paradise Lost to Paradise Regained book. Now, for the younger JWs or ex-JWs listening, you'll be like, I don't recall that. I understand. It's my generation. But for those that are close to my age, oh, you'll remember this book. It was kind of peached color. And it went to every meeting with me. And this book featured some doozies. Imagine being 55 and remembering like it was 5 minutes ago, staring at the illustrations in this book, one that is burned on my brain forever, of a little girl, maybe 5 years old, desperately trying to grab her baby doll as she is swallowed by the earth at an earthquake. And right next to her is her puppy dog going down into the hole with her. Page 209 shows kids running out of a burning house as they teach them what's happening to this system of things. In comedy standards, it's this book you'll also remember shows Jesus clean shaven. He got a quick shave and a haircut before he went on the stake. It's a doozy of an illustration. But as a kid in the early 70s, this is what my baby brain was exposed to. It was an assault on my mind. Look at that little girl in her dress with her doll and her puppy getting sucked into the earth and killed. I mean, look, I remember it. I remember the emotions. I used to open the book and stare at it, open the book and stare at it, open the book and stare at it. And it was a giant, almost like a mini mural of destruction. But my eyes as a kid honed right in on the other little kid, which is what kids do. And that book was filled with some doozies too. Here's a quote. To all surviving flesh, the dead bodies will be disgusting, hateful things. Worms will not stop swarming over the millions of bodies until the last body is eaten up. Birds and beasts also will eat their fill of human flesh until nothing is left but white bones. End quote. I was getting this book at 4 and 5 years old. I remember it. I remember the kingdom hall I was in. I remember the congregation in Southern California. If you want a sneak peek into what that 1958 book did to generations of kids, now adults like me, please go search for Paradise Lost to Paradise Restored on Amazon right now. It's up there. Someone's selling it. And I'm not saying buy it. What I am saying to do, if you want to see the damage done to my generation, read the Amazon reviews. They're stunning. Both good and bad. They're stunning in both directions. 86% have given this book a 5-star review. A 5-star review. Never mind that it's filled with bullshit. None of it came true, but it's filled with pictures of kids being killed. So you can see what it does to the brain of those who are still loyally serving as Jehovah's Witnesses and those of us that left. A strange paradox that follows us through life. And that was the first book. As I mentioned, I personally, as a child, was probably more impacted over the long term by my book of Bible stories, which came out in 1978. I was about 10 years old. And look, I feel like we could do a feature episode, but we'll need videos on that book because it is a horror show. There's scenes of violence from almost the first few pages. Babies being drowned, bullies beating kids to death. There's demons. There's babies about to be cut in half with a sword. There's a man with a tent pin through his head. There's shots of a big brother killing his little brother with blood everywhere. There's shots of Jesus in horrific pain. I was 10. At the same meetings that would tell me not to watch certain movies, that Star Wars was bad because it was violent, I was sitting there with this yellow book in my little lap, looking at these pictures to get through the 2 hours on a Sunday meeting because I was bored stiff. This is what was going into my mind. I immediately, in looking at this type of stuff, connected that all my classmates at school were going to die. Many of my unbelieving relatives, I remember my mom, my grandmother, my mom's side, who was a wonderful, sweet lady, remember me thinking she was going to die, and I was worried about it. And then by extension, if I didn't get out in service, put on a tie on Saturdays, if I didn't stay away from the girls in junior high school, if I didn't give up sports, if I looked at a birthday cake, if I didn't deny my feelings and my emotions, I too was going to die. I'm not dramatizing. I was 10. And I was far from alone. The assault on a child's mind and how they think and their emotions, it's just this subtle drip. Maybe it's not so subtle as I look back, but it's real. As you grow into a teenager, the assault on a kid's mind literally hits on every subject you might expect as normal for any teenager. Almost all of them centered on a teenager or a kid's social development. Now, if you were raised a Jehovah's Witness, you already had an understanding that everyone around you that wasn't like you was going to die. But as you hit the teenage years, they begin then to control every aspect of who you are as a person. And maybe it even comes earlier, but this is where I remember it, late 70s, early 80s. All the social makeup of you as a human being, including decision-making, your social skills, all of it. Let me give you some examples from my childhood. The Blood Red Youth Book, 1976, page 39, which this entire book could be summed up with Be very ashamed of who you are, your body, and your desires. That's like a one-sentence synopsis on the youth book. I would love to hear how anybody my age or who studied in that as a kid feels about that book. It's filled with doozies, but I'm going to give you one that I think most ex-Jehovah's Witnesses might be aware of. I don't know about current Jehovah's Witnesses, but on page 39, it makes comments like this. This is just one example of the assault on the way you think as a kid. Quote, weakly giving in to sexual desires by masturbation will certainly not give you strength when faced with a situation tempting you to commit fornication or even homosexuality. Just the opposite. It cultivates wrong thinking and wrong desires. In fact, masturbation can lead into homosexuality. End quote. There needs to be a whole show on that book because my God, is it bad. But there I was, baby brain, 1976. This book came out. I studied this with an elder, very nice man as a kid, who I didn't have a father, so he wanted to teach me about puberty, and this was the book I learned in. Masturbating could turn me gay. There's nothing wrong with being gay. That's an entire 2-episode story we're going to get into because of the hate and vitriol extended to gay people. It's horrific. It's a crime. But this was the kind of assault that was going on a child's mind in the late 70s. It was followed by the school brochure, page 24, which basically tells you you're abnormal and different from all other kids. And by the way, no funds allowed. A couple of examples. On page 24, under the subheading cheerleader and homecoming queen, you get this rousing counsel. Quote, similarly, we feel that for a witness youth to serve as a homecoming or beauty queen would be in violation of Bible principles that show the impropriety of glorifying humans, end quote. Listen to that sentence. Listen to it. It's literally one sentence, and it's packed with everything I'm trying to bring to the light of what it does to a child's brain. It starts out with saying, we feel. Who's we? The 8 guys in upstate New York, the governing body? There's no quoted scripture. There's nothing from the Bible, no comments from Jesus on being a homecoming queen. Go ahead and give it a look if you want. Go ahead. Or a cheerleader for that matter. Lots of jokes in here. But it starts by saying, we feel that for a witness kid to be a homecoming or beauty queen would be a violation of Bible principles. Which ones? Like what? I didn't check Jesus. Did Jesus go to homecoming or prom? I must have missed that in the Gospels. That it's glorifying humans to be recognized by your peers as someone that they like? Is it really that serious? Really? It goes on page 24 to talk about school dances, which, might I add, I snuck out to a few. It says, it is the custom of Jehovah's Witnesses to stay clear of school dances, end quote. Really? Why? Doesn't give you any information. It's just, as it says with cheerleaders and homecoming queens, we feel it. We feel it, so therefore it is. So there you are in your formative years. You're dealing with acne, puberty, trying to figure out what you're all about. You're having bad hair days. You're horribly insecure. You have a crush on someone. None of that. This is what we're going to cover. This is what we're going to push into the mind of a developing child. Pisses me off. It's just an unbelievable crime against young people. These publications, and there are many more, but the one from my generation at this time, I was a very young adult, my 20s, but they popped out the Young People Ask book in 1989. They've had several versions and revisions later. But if you breeze through that book and look what kids are being exposed to, you're going to bang your head against the table. Just a couple of examples. In the tip box on page 31 is a sampling of the advice this book doles out. It says, quote, if your parents have a divorce, one or quite likely both of them have made some mistakes. Try to identify those mistakes so that you can avoid repeating them if you choose to marry in the future, end quote. Hey, fellas in New York, 13 and 14-year-old kids who have parents that are divorcing are in a world of pain, a world of insecurity, a world of trying to figure out what this is going to mean, what it looks like. Do I love mom more? Do I love dad more? Emotions so intense and so complex that you never recover from them. As most therapists will tell you, you learn to manage them. This is the tip you're giving us by means of Holy Spirit on page 31. Watch your parents closely. They've both screwed up. Figure out how they screwed up so that in the future you don't screw up just like they did. I could give you so many more examples. So many more. Okay, one more. Because again, all of us remember what it's like to be a teenager and all the emotions and the hormones and everything going on in your life. Is there a more insecure time, a more tumultuous, a more, in a lot of ways, scary time in your life? You're trying to figure out who you are when you look in the mirror. And then you see a zit and everything goes sideways, right? This is what they give us under the section, How Can I Build My Confidence, in the Young People Ask Book of 1989, page 86. You get the following advice. Remember, the question is, how do I build my confidence? This is how. Quote, the Christian ministry is rewarding because it forces you to stop thinking about yourself and start thinking about others. Just a reminder that as a kid, you turn to this book that you think is coming from Jesus and Jehovah to learn how to build your confidence, and you're told to get your ass out in the ministry. Is because you shouldn't be thinking about yourself at all. I'm sorry, I turned to this chapter because I'm looking for self-confidence. No, you shouldn't even be thinking about self-confidence. Get out in the ministry. Stop thinking about yourself. It's just, never mind the level of poor authorship in these books. But to pass it off as something that is good for the mind of a child or a teenager is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. I have several examples here, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to bore you stiff on this. These books, by the way, these quotes, they're all available on that awful website. They're still pumping this out to kids, to anybody that wants to read it. Like it's words of wisdom from Jesus and his 8 guys in upstate New York. And let me tell you, it doesn't matter what the question is. It doesn't matter what's bothering a child or what emotions they're dealing with. It doesn't matter if it's an eating disorder. It doesn't matter if it's sexual desire or if it's I'm gay or how should I dress or how can I get along with my family or I'm in a step family. All of it. It doesn't matter what the subject is. Let me save you time on reading these books. The answer is all the same. Pray more and be a Jehovah's Witness. That's it. That's the answer. Veiled in tip boxes as they got into the 80s and 90s, the publication kids were exposed to had little quizzes they could take and they could write answers in the book. All of this. It's a full-blown assault on a child or teenager's mind to just do more for the organization. In fact, in one section on depression in this book, entitled, Why Am I So Sad? Kids are just told to pray more. Just pray. Just pray. I can't laugh at that. And I really hope not a lot of us can, aside from the absurdity, the stupidity of this advice. Depression in a young person is incredibly serious, as we know. It can lead to absolute tragedy. In fact, on page 96 of this Young People Ask book, what they're feeding children in this organization, it tells kids contemplating suicide to talk to someone. But it's not even a chapter or paragraph. It's in an ultra tiny little asterisk at the bottom of the page. You got to pull out magnifying glass to read it. To talk to someone, not a professional therapist or somebody that can give professional help. Just, hey, you should talk to someone, a little asterisk in miniature letters. Page 101 in this book, in a box. I said I wasn't going to give these, but they're so shocking. And it goes to what I want out there and hope it helps at least one person to see. On page 101 in the box, it says, did you know? That's the title of the box. They're always cute box titles. Questions from the readers. Did you know? Here's a tip. In this box, did you know, guilts the kid contemplating suicide by saying, and I quote, the victims of suicide are not only those who take their life, but also the loved ones who are left behind, end quote. Imagine you're a child of Jehovah's Witnesses. You're so confused. You're so distraught. It could be any number of problems. It could be all problems. And you're looking for some sort of comfort. And in the did you know box, you read, goes hand in hand with the stuff I read earlier about quit thinking about yourself, just pray more. You read that, hey, you're not the only one who's having a hard time. If you kill yourself, all the rest of us are going to be sad about it. It's just guilting the kid. It's just unbelievable. It's shocking in so many ways. That's a sampling of the publications that Jehovah's Witness children are exposed to in this religion that help develop their minds, the way they think, the way they make lifelong decisions like marriage, dating, employment, education. This is what they're fed. But let's put that on the shelf for a minute. And I want to talk about something that when I left in 2012 was brand new, was led by the governing body. In particular, Tony Morris likes to wrap his arms around this one and take credit for it in some bizarre way. And that is how they now target the minds of children with cartoons, with Caleb and Sophia, two Pixar-looking Disney characters, a little girl and a little boy, with a father who has a thick accent and a mom who could be seen cleaning the house in every episode. That's what she's good for, cleaning the house and telling them to throw toys away. Not kidding. Whole other subject. But if you've seen these, Jehovah's Witnesses now are taking their little kids and they're turning off the evils of television, of Scooby-Doo or Power Rangers or what. I'm showing my age, aren't I? I don't even know what cartoons are out there now. Anime. I know that's big. Turn that off, plopping them down, and having them take in an episode of Caleb and Sophia. When I saw these, I was out of the organization. But I remember literally talking in therapy about the rage I felt seeing these. Did it trigger me? Sure it did. And it should trigger anyone that's exposed to them. And by that, I mean adults. If you were a witness that stumbled here and you're bravely still listening, I have nothing but respect for you. I'm really hoping something here helps you. That's the honest to goodness truth. But if you're a parent and you're letting these kids watch these, please look at what they're doing. The episode that just unnerved me was the ice cream money episode. Little Pixar cartoon girls. Little Sophia wants a double scoop. She's daydreaming about it. But then she begins to feel pangs of guilt because she sees her mom drop a little bit of money in the contribution box at the Kingdom Hall. So little Sophia says, never mind, I don't need ice cream. I want to help build more Kingdom Halls. Never realizing the governing body has a real estate empire where they're making millions on by flipping Kingdom Halls. Subject for another day. But the governing body is getting kids at the age where they're watching cartoons and teaching them to give them their money. Children. Guilting them. Don't fool yourself. It's not innocent, and they know what they're doing. The other one that really grabbed me on this series was the one, and I think it might have even been the very first episode. The whole series is called How Can I Be Jehovah's Friend or something to that effect. Little Caleb brings home a toy that somebody at his class gave him. It's Sparlock. He's a little wizard. He looks remarkably like Mickey Mouse from Fantasia, if you're old enough to remember that. And young Caleb, and this is so sickening. Every time I think about this, children watching this are exposed to the thought that you can't be Jehovah's friend, that he is, and I quote, sad with you. You are making Jehovah sad if you have toys that look like a wizard. That Jehovah becomes very sad that you would play with a wizard toy. Let's unpack this for a minute. Children are being given the message that Jehovah instantly turns his attention to a little guy, 4, 5, 6, 7, with a toy. You remember Jehovah, right? The same God who apparently doesn't mind kids being sexually assaulted or abused among Jehovah's Witnesses. Nothing's been changed. Doesn't mind that kids are being bullied. Doesn't stop it. The same God that kicked back and watched children during the Holocaust. The same guy. And a child who grows and matures with each year goes, wait a minute, I can't play with a wizard? Jehovah didn't address some things that cost people their lives, but I'm making him sad because I'm playing with a toy. And I don't want to even get into the fact that the same parents of Jehovah's Witnesses that plop their child down in front of Caleb and Sophia are the same parents that take their children to Disneyland on a family vacation. They'll watch this episode and you're a kid going, wait a minute, Jehovah won't be my friend and I make him sad if I play with a wizard. But mommy and daddy are taking me to 4 days at Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom, where I will watch Disney movies with talking animals, magic, fairies, all kinds of stuff. Same parents. Am I being dramatic? There are children who contemplate such things. Caleb and Sophia and that entire series has to be one of the most damaging, disgusting things they have ever done to kids without the aforementioned crimes at the outset. It's a full-blown assault on the mind of an innocent child. And there are other episodes, folks. I don't know how many videos there are to this. If you're a witness listening bravely or someone who was exposed to these as a kid, there's one with Sophia looking out the car window at a poster on the street of a girl getting a diploma or degree, and she decides to purposely fail a test so she won't be held high as a smart student and possibly go on to more education. Purposely fails the test. Can you imagine? There's another where Caleb, the little guy, all in cartoon format, decides not to play video games. And it shows the angels and Jesus in heaven doing the wave like they're in a football stadium, high-fiving each other. There's yet another one showing Noah and his family drowning with the animals because Noah didn't obey Jehovah and build the ark. So Jehovah drowned him. That's but a high-level headline of these horrific cartoons that are being force-fed to Jehovah's Witness children. Innocent little minds. Innocent little babies. If that doesn't wake someone up, I just don't know what will. Innocent children are exposed to this. I want to take a minute and talk about something even more serious, something that impacted me, something that people who've reached out to me listening to this podcast or that I've talked to just in real life has impacted dramatically, and that's the subject of Armageddon. Remember, Jehovah's Witness children are exposed to everything at the Kingdom Hall an adult is. They're not left out. Kids learn about a worldwide genocide from birth. From birth. Whether it's in talks, dramas, videos, cartoons, they're exposed to all the illustrations of mass destruction and death in the publications. They hear it, a young kid at a Kingdom Hall during the meeting. They'll hear it from their parents, from the elders, from other adults. They hear it. I'm not going to spend 10 minutes proving that science has shown children are taking everything in that's going on in a room, that they're hearing, they're listening, it's impacting their minds, their brains, the way they think. It's so serious and so awful that in May of 2020, parents, it probably had been going on for a short time, but they addressed it, the governing body that is, in May of 2020. Parents were writing in to the upstate New York resort and complaining about the violence that the governing body was exposing their children to in videos, magazines, and books. The governing body, at least two that I have watched, went on their little cool TV station and basically told parents to pipe down. shut up. Complaining about the violent videos wasn't going to get them to stop. The governing body literally gave counsel to parents who wanted to protect their little kids' brains and told them, look, they got to know what's coming. Go watch it. Toni Morris literally looking at parents and telling them, toughen up. We're not going to stop these videos. And they're ancient videos of Hezekiah, people being killed and slaughtered. There's videos showing Armageddon. There's videos showing the Great Tribulation now that are so comically bad. I have tears running down my face. I'm laughing so hard. But I'm an adult. A child at a district convention is looking on in horror at Jehovah's Witnesses on a large TV screen being surrounded by men with machine guns, of secret bunkers that they're going to have to know a code to get into the door. Children are being exposed to this. And then the very next talk or symposium might be about entertainment and how they shouldn't watch violent R-rated movies, followed by a talk showing Jehovah's Witnesses being assaulted by the government with machine guns. It's just unbelievable. But worse than that, this organization teaches children directly, teaches them directly that, hey, you better do what we're doing, or you might just find yourself on the dead end of Armageddon. The Watchtower of 1950, yeah, it's an old one, but trust me, there are many. 1115, page 463, question from the readers. Just imagine Jesus telling the 8 guys in upstate New York of that time period what to write. And he told them to write this. An Ohio reader wrote it and said, will children who have not reached the age of accountability and who die at Armageddon have a resurrection? I mean, imagine having to ask that question first and foremost. This is the answer from the faithful slave, the governing body. Quote, we cannot be dogmatic about this matter as God is the judge. However, if Jehovah God expresses an adverse judgment against certain individuals and does this through his king, Christ Jesus, at Armageddon, there must be some sort of finality to God's decision. If so, those destroyed by the judgment of God in the Battle of Armageddon are really destroyed. Remember the question, our kids? Ezekiel chapter 9 appears to refer to Armageddon. It doesn't, but back to the quote. And verse 6 states, slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women, end quote. Why am I laughing? Because I can't believe myself or any grown adult is sitting there listening to this counsel, knowing the children are taking this in. But it doesn't stop there. Second paragraph, quote, children are affected by the course of their parents. Parents are commanded to instruct their children in God's ways. And if in these last days parents refuse to heed the divine instruction and warning, they bring destruction upon themselves and their small children at Armageddon. According to justice, God can leave such children dead, just as Ezekiel showed. If you don't laugh, you start breaking things. Couple that kind of counsel told to a child is coming from Jehovah and Jesus with horrific imagery of children, people, little guys, little girls being killed or harmed in their literature, and you have the seed planted for major trauma, fear, and anxiety. And remember, as always, if you're a PME, POMO, PME, whatever the acronyms are, and you're considering this counsel is in your library online from the faithful slave, the same guys that they claim Jesus chose them across the entire planet and said to be sure the children saw and heard these things. Little baby brains, innocent, precious babies. What's the result to all this? I can tell you that those that are exposed to this grow up to be adults with all kinds of issues, this podcast host included. Whether it's disassociating, whether it's an inability to feel some things, whether it's a distorted view, whether it's fear of mortality, whatever the case may be, you don't come out unscathed. It almost always involves anxiety in the adult that was a Jehovah's Witness child. Some experts, and I cannot corroborate this, but you can find this online. Some experts have estimated that the rate of suicides associated with Jehovah's Witnesses to be 5 to 10 times the rate of the general population. I can tell you I've lost wonderful people as adults who took their lives. It's impossible to obtain numbers and stats. It doesn't matter. If it was one person, it's one too many. Again, picture that little child that grew up to be a hairy old guy. According to the 2008 study from Pew Research, only 37% of people raised as Jehovah's Witnesses continue with this horrific religion as adults. I'll just tell you in conclusion, in what is, quite frankly, just a pressing gut punch of a subject in an episode, but one that I feel has to be put out there for those that have the authority to stop this. Maybe it's just one of us in a parental environment or as a friend. But if it saves one kid, this has to be talked about. The children who were raised as Jehovah's Witnesses often live in a malaise as an adult. They need a lot of help. They struggle with friendships, romantic relationships, secular gimmies, things like employment, retirement, finances. And if you ever wonder why, because everybody faces challenges, whether you're a Jehovah's Witness or not, but if you ever wonder why, make no mistake, they were exposed to just a sampling of the things I've shared over the last 45 minutes or so as a baby, as a little person, while their brain was forming between the ages of 1 and 7. They were exposed to lies, to fairy tales, and in my mind, much worse, they're exposed to abuse. Now, as adults, I think we'd all agree that oftentimes we lean on each other. We form friendships. I know I've gotten to know some folks who listen, and I'm sorry I can't get to everyone. It makes me heartsick just based on time, but DMs and messages of other people in my age group or slightly younger or in their 20s or who can relate to the assault on their child baby brain, their mind, when they were developing by this religion. It's so difficult to describe the way a adult who was a Jehovah's Witness child thinks or how they feel to even people they meet later in life, a spouse, someone who wasn't a witness. It becomes this incredible challenge, these triggers, these traumas that someone who just loves you for who you are doesn't understand because they weren't there when you were a little guy or a little girl. It's an all-out assault on the mind of a child. And while some of us are in middle age and some of us are older, I can't emphasize enough that, I get comments every now and negative ones like, why are you doing this? Just go live your life. I do. That's why I waited 13 years to do this. I never thought I'd do this. But if I think for 1 minute, for 1 second, that a single child, a single young person can be spared not only the horrific crimes physically mentioned at the outset, but the horrific assault on their mind in this religion, I'm going to keep talking. And I think we all should. There are future generations that are in tremendous danger in this religion, in this cult. They're exposed to things that don't show up as bruises. They don't show up in arrest dockets or at the police station. They walk away without the physical things, but they carry all the mental and emotional pain of that in which they were exposed to among Jehovah's Witnesses. So I ask everyone in what is a very long episode, I apologize, I knew it, as I rant, to please consider the little people. If you're a little person listening to this, I'm not sure that's okay. If you're really tiny, if you're someone in the teen years or in the 20s or a parent, please consider what the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses is doing to the minds of children. Life is hard enough. There's challenges. You don't need a cult telling you you're going to die, or telling you how to dress, or how to look at yourself physically, or that your sexuality is bad, or that touching yourself is bad, or that even liking yourself and accepting an honor is bad. Love yourself. Really simple message from the Jesus of the Bible. Very simple. Love God. Love your neighbor as you love who? Yourself. So please, let's do all we can as gray-haired people, adults, no matter what generation we're in, to do what we can to stop the assault on the minds of children in Jehovah's Witnesses. All right, I'm going to call it a week. I appreciate you hanging around with me for what it was a long episode built mostly on emotion, to be honest. A subject I'm probably going to come back to more often than not, as I basically shared that this is what drives this podcast in my thought process. So hopefully we'll have some fun coming down the road. I think we're going to tackle an episode on growing up Jehovah's Witness in the 70s and 80s, and that's going to be great because we're going to do some wide leggers, disco, hair metal, and some other fun stuff for those of us of that generation. But I tell you now, thanks for listening. If you are a witness listening, your courage is absolutely respected. Please, please be good to yourself. And for everyone else, thank you so much for your support. Be well out there, and I'll see you next week.